Sorry, it's moving slowly this morning, but it is preparing to live stream.
Thank you.
Okay, we're all set now. Thanks.
Okay, whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We'll call to order. Do we have quorum, Tara? I guess is the first question.
Yes, we do.
Okay, thank you. Having seen the agenda, any declarations of pecuniary interests to be noted at this point? None are noted. I guess we'll go to reports and climate change action plan. Who's up on that?
Well, good morning, Mr. Chair. It's Randy Schurtzer here from County Planning Department. We have Hiba Hussein will provide an update on this project. Hiba has been the lead planning staff person working on this project with the consulting group, who the county has hired to help assist us with this project. So, okay. Hiba.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Can everyone hear me? Perfect. My name is Hiba Hussein, as Randy mentioned, and I am the planner leading the climate change action plan at the county. I just quickly want to spend a few minutes this morning kind of going over the project and just providing a very brief overview of what the project is. I'm sure many of you on this call might have heard me speak already. So with this project began in early 2019 as the county joined the Partners for Climate Protection program. This is a program that was created by the Canadian Federation of Municipalities and ICLEI Canada. And it's primarily a program that provides resources and funding opportunities to municipalities as they develop their climate change action plans. So the county saw fit to join this program. And as part of the program, we have to follow the PCP program's milestone framework. And so this framework lays out 5 milestones that each county must, or each government that joins the program must meet in order to achieve a successful climate change plan. And the milestones include starting and creating a baseline inventory, setting an emissions reduction target, developing the actual plan, implementing the plan, and then tracking the plan. The initial stages that I'm working on will require us to meet milestones 1 to 3, which will take us up to developing the plan. And we're hoping to achieve milestone 3 by March 2021. So hopefully in the spring, we'll have a fully developed climate change plan. This plan was identified as a way to bring Grey County more sustainable options as we and policies as we move forward, and try to identify the gaps in our existing framework. And so there's a lot of policies in place at the planning department and at the county level wide that deals with climate change and is already doing a lot of the great work of helping us become more sustainable. We thought part of this project would be to identify some of those gaps, and this policy document would help fill those gaps that exist. The climate change plan will focus on 2 areas. It'll have a community section, which will look at our emissions within the community, and then it'll have a corporate emissions section, which will look at all emissions within our corporate-owned assets. Which then the community section of the plan will further be broken down into 6 themes, which includes buildings, transportation, waste, agriculture, land use, and energy. In terms of quickly going over the project timeline, so as I mentioned, we started phase 1 and 2 in early December of 2019, and this included developing a communications plan, working with committees, and starting up our external internal committees, collecting data for the inventory. Phase 2 and 3 was primarily in the spring and is still currently, it's primarily carrying out our communication plan, identifying those gaps within our existing plans, and conducting an inventory mapping and analysis. Phase 4 and 5, which will be what we carry on late into this year and early next year, will be continuing our engagement and our communication strategy, finalizing our priorities in terms of action items, setting our targets, and developing a draft action plan. In terms of engagement, the county has been very focused on engaging with the public and our stakeholders on this project. It's been a priority for us. And as part of that engagement, we've created 3 primary groups that we seek input from. That includes the Climate Change Task Force, which is a council, which is a group made up of county council and senior management staff. And they help provide us strategic direction and guidance on the plan. We've also created the Climate Change Internal Working Group, which is primarily a group created from staff from various departments at the county. And they help provide us strategic input on corporate perspectives and kind of help inform the process and recommendations from a departmental perspective, and really help inform the corporate section of our plan. And lastly, we have the Climate Change External Working Group, and these are members of our local health units, conservation authorities, organizations, academics, some of the members are from our local climate action groups. And this group is very critical in our development of our plan, and will provide and does provide local expertise, suggestions, and recommendations, and help informs the community portion of our plan. Up to date, we've been focusing on online and face-to-face engagement. So our engagement has changed drastically from our communications plan. As everyone can imagine, we're not doing as much face-to-face engagement anymore, but we're still hoping to get the same level of feedback from the public. So our main focus up to date has been on online surveys to collect feedback. We've also been doing interviews and focus groups through Zoom. We've been holding online workshops, and we've been having targeting meetings with our stakeholders, would include the ag community, the tourism community, and the small business community. We're hoping to potentially hold an open house depending on the status of COVID, but hopefully in the new year we can present a draft plan at an open house and get some feedback, some face-to-face feedback. That's my quick update. I'm happy to stick around and answer any questions on the plan if anybody has any. Thank you.
Thanks, Heba. Yes, and just for process, most people are on mute. Just please unmute, and we'll try to queue up any questions for Heba at this point in time. While people are digesting the question, are you aware of how this program compares, or how your approach, the approach of Grey County compares to other counties that you're aware of, or maybe it's early yet? Do you mind unmuting? Thanks. Sorry.
Sorry about that.
There we go.
Yes, we are. In the beginning of this project, we did a background study. So we looked at municipalities and our neighbors, our direct neighbors, to see what kind of plans they had. One of the benefits of hiring Ackley Canada is that they have such a wide range of experience with climate action development. So they've done a lot of work with here on Kinloss. They developed their plan, and then they also developed the Kawartha Lakes climate change plan. So they did bring that wealth of knowledge into our plan, and so we're hoping to kind of benefit from some of that work that they've done in those communities.
Thank you. Yes. Any questions on this topic that our members of the committee might have? Seeing none, Randy, anything further you'd like to add on this topic?
No, I think Hiba's covered it really well. So
thank you. Yeah, thanks very much. That's an important initiative that will continue to be a topic of focus going forward, I'm sure. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
Affordable housing, there looks like a verbal update. Who is that? Who has that mandate?
I can provide that update for the committee. So again, good morning.
Thanks, Randy.
So we wanted to provide an update with respect to what is being done to create more affordable housing in our communities. And this work is stemming from the Affordable Housing Task Force that has been set up by council. The county housing departments, economic development staff, and planning staff were working on various actions that have been discussed at that task force table. And one of the key items that has been developed as a result of the updated 10-year housing and homelessness plan, as well as has been supported by the task force, is the development of an affordable housing action plan. And one of the first action items is the development of a task force, which has now been established and is currently meeting on a regular basis. The next step is to determine the current and projected housing needs for each area of the county. And our planning data analysis coordinator, Brad Noble, has been analyzing various data sets. Seniors housing for sure is a high need, but we also need family housing and housing for employees in our different communities that are especially tied to large employers. We will be analyzing this data in further detail with the task force and with the various local municipalities. And we'll, of course, bring forward any updates as part of that work to this table as well. Another action item is establishing an affordable housing fund. And this could be funds that are considered by council as either one-time commitments or ongoing funding to support the housing that is required, as well as assessing the availability of provincial and federal funds. And we've connected with folks like CMHC to see what funds are available to help support some of these affordable housing builds. The funds would, of course, be used to secure land, to provide incentives for building affordable housing, as well as to help fund actual builds. Another action item is to establish a land bank. And we've started by looking at what properties are currently owned by the county or by local municipalities to see if any of these properties are suitable for an affordable housing build. And we've already identified several properties, and we will continue to work with local municipalities to look at any further properties and to get these properties shovel ready by pre-zoning them to allow for an affordable housing build, whether that's built by the county housing department or through a nonprofit housing provider or by partnering with private developers to create a mix of affordable and attainable housing units. One of the properties we are currently exploring further are the lands acquired in the town of Durham. These lands were required to support the redevelopment of the new Rockwood Terrace long-term care facility. The county was able to acquire approximately 32 acres of land, and we need about 5 to 6 acres for the new Rockwood, which leaves us with approximately 25 acres that we could utilize for other housing. The Committee of Management has directed staff to retain a housing consultant to explore housing options for these lands, including developing a campus of care whereby a range of housing options is provided in basically a single location, which could include independent seniors housing, to assisted living housing, to, of course, the long-term care housing. The consultant will explore the market to determine what is needed from a housing perspective in and around that Durham area and assess the capital and operating costs of the various options. One of the nice things too is that they've hired an architect as a sub-consultant. So we'll have a concept plan at the end of this project, which will also identify what this property could look like once fully developed. We anticipate that this will be completed in the next 6 months. Another action item is to develop an incentive package to support more rental housing. And we've started doing that already with our community improvement plan program. And this is where we can provide incentives such as donation of land, reduce application and development fees, or tax exemptions in order to encourage more rental housing and affordable housing to be developed. We are working with local municipalities to adopt the CIPs, And I'm pleased to say that all of our local municipalities are either in the process of developing or updating their existing community improvement plans, or have adopted a community improvement plan which aligns with the county's CIP program. This will then allow both the county and local municipality to offer incentives to target priority developments, which include affordable and attainable housing. County Council is also considering exempting new rental developments and nonprofit housing developments from a county development charge. And we are currently in the process of updating the development charges bylaws to consider this exemption. We actually have a public meeting scheduled for this Thursday, and we hope to have then the development charge bylaws updated before the end of the year. Another action item that we're looking at is to assess the existing county housing properties and to look for opportunities to either retain the housing units that we have, redevelop some of the units, or even divest some of the existing housing units. Some of the existing county housing is older, and it's not necessarily the type of housing we are needing now or over the next 20 plus years. So some of those housing units could be sold, and we can utilize those funds to rebuild units that address current and projected needs. And our housing department is already currently doing this for some of our housing units, and our housing department will be looking for other opportunities for our existing properties. One of the other action items is working with nonprofit housing providers and private developers to increase the number of affordable and market rentals in our communities. We have 2 recent examples already whereby, working with the Owen Sound Housing Corporation, they are creating an additional 60 affordable housing units at the development that's called the Adawa Heights development in Owen Sound. And we've also partnered with a private developer in Durham to construct a total of 14 rental units, 11 of those being affordable. And the rates are to be kept affordable through an agreement that we have with that landowner for at least a 20-year period. We want to explore more of these types of partnerships to help create more affordable and attainable housing in our communities. So those are just some of the highlights of what the Affordable Housing Task Force and county staff are working on in order to create more affordable and attainable housing in our communities. And we'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Randy. Yes, so lots to unpack there for committee members. Any questions, comments, discussion?
I think I see the warden's hand up.
Please go ahead. Tara, do you have control? I don't have control, so somebody go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and just a brief comment that, and thank you for all those comments that you're making, Randy. And I know we, as county council, are working toward creating some opportunities there as well. I just wanted to share, and I shared this with some others the other day. We have a developer in Markdale that is building townhomes that's creating, during that project, they're creating a separate entrance to the basement portion that can open up the opportunity to create a rental unit in the basement. So it's sort of designing, it's sort of a small part that's being done, that it's creating that opportunity if those homeowners wish to create a rental in their basement, it's already built in, basically just closing off a door and creating that rental. So those are sort of small things, I think, that I thought was really a great idea, that, working with our development community, just by doing those small little things, that creates that opportunity if a homeowner wishes to, or whoever purchases those properties wish to do that, because rentals is also part of that short supply of what we have. So anyway, I just think that was something I wanted to share, and I think that's just a small thing that just working with developers or developers doing it just creates that opportunity that could work to our advantage down the road.
Thank you. Yes. Thanks, Paul.
And that's definitely homes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Maybe while people are processing that, we use the word affordable many times, Randy. Is there a definition, and I know this is an impossible question, but is there a definition around what affordable means?
Yeah, there's varying definitions. The provincial definition uses 30% of your total household income before taxes, so your gross income is spent towards housing. And so we're using that as somewhat of a baseline, but we're also looking at core housing need. So core housing need is something that's defined by the CMHC, which looks at a number of different factors in terms of not only income, but also the suitability and availability of housing as well. So we're looking at a number of factors to try to get a sense of what truly is required, what is needed in our various communities, especially in that core housing need aspect. We recognize, though, that there's also a need for what we call that maybe attainable housing, or that missing middle housing, as sometimes it's referred to. That's the housing that if you have an income, household income of 30 to 100,000, there is still a need for housing in that category, in that range. And this is what we're hearing from employers in terms of employees not being able to find housing in and around their communities where they work. And so we know there's a need. And what we're trying to do is, while we're looking at potential builds for affordable housing, we recognize that in order to make a development sustainable, and this is what our nonprofit housing providers are even finding, is that they're able to offer that affordable housing unit, but also those market rent units as well. And that helps to provide some additional revenue to help support and sustain the operation and the ongoing costs to manage that building. So that's something that we definitely want to explore, because for us, then it provides opportunities for both the affordable housing, which we know there's still a need based on our county housing wait list, but there's also a need for that attainable or that market housing. And we think that in some cases we'll be able to capture both, so to speak, or to address both challenges by looking at those opportunities.
Thanks, Randy. Other questions or comments on this topic before we? Yeah, Shirley, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And Randy, I know we're all aware of the current significant increases in building costs, building materials in particular, and recognizing that wages certainly aren't keeping up with that in terms of people in need of affordable housing. And just wondering how that's considered as we look for other initiatives and incentives and grant opportunities, and how those increased building costs are sort of being tracked as we follow our needs for affordable housing.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think part of this is being driven by just the overall demand for housing construction in our area, as well as result of the pandemic in terms of having building supply shortages. And we're hearing this from a number of developers and builders that the cost of construction is not decreasing. That's for sure. It's increasing. We're hearing in some cases, some supplies 20 to 30% higher than what it was even a year or so ago. So that's significant. And all the more reason then why we need to look at some of the incentives, as I talked about through the community improvement plan, looking for those partnership opportunities, looking for grant funding opportunities to help make those costs somewhat more realistic in order to proceed with some of these builds. Because without those supports, I think it's even more so a challenge in order for someone to be able to develop a product at a price point that will help address some of those housing needs in our communities. So I think it's even more pressing, I guess, the need to have these types of incentive programs, these types of other options that we're exploring in order to create this housing, especially in the light of the fact that our demand continues to increase in this area and the housing costs and land costs continue to increase. I'm sure you saw the recent announcement by the Real Estate Association where last month they reached an average house sale of over $500,000. That's the first time in history, or in recorded history anyways, where that has been the case. So we know that those prices continue to increase, driving the fact that we need more of this housing in order to help folks just be able to live and work within our communities.
Thanks, Randy. Any other? Yes, Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted, Randy, if you could speak to the part about secondary units, and that's sort of was the other, where I was going with the comment I made earlier on. I know Grey County allows secondary units, and I know certain municipalities, but also on the DC charge, which you're proposing coming forward as well on that secondary unit, because with those secondary units, that gives another supply of a possibility of housing or rental or whatever. I don't know if you wish to comment a bit more on that.
For sure. Just to build on what you mentioned, Mr. Warden, with respect to builders and developers putting in accesses into basements, we're hearing that from other builders and developers as well. And it's, you know, we're hearing that it's cheaper to put those accesses in while the unit's actually being built, rather than trying to retrofit them after the fact. So we are hearing more and more developers are doing that, even if it's not being requested necessarily by the because it's, in some cases, it's not that expensive to put in that separate access. Like I said, when you're pouring the foundation initially, or when you're doing the initial construction of the housing unit. We just need to make sure that from a policy perspective, and I think most of our municipalities have this, we, you know, are addressing things like parking and servicing and other things that go along with having secondary units, which I think are fantastic and I think can fulfill a need within our communities. On the incentive side, as the warden indicated, we're also looking at, we were proposing some exemptions to our development charges bylaws to align with proposed changes to the Development Charges Act that would exempt pretty much any secondary unit that's being proposed. So if you're proposing a basement apartment, if you're proposing an addition to your house as a secondary unit, or if you're proposing a detached garage with a secondary unit, say above or attached to that garage, we were proposing to exempt those from a county development charge as well. We just heard from the province last month that the proposed changes to the Development Charges Act have now been approved. They've been proclaimed. So as of September 18th, most secondary units are exempt from a development charge. So that's great. So what we'll do is make sure our county development charge bylaws will align with those changes that have been now put in the Development Charges Act. And what this means is that when someone's building either a new house or even have an existing house and want to add a secondary unit, most cases, subject to the details and the regulations, but in most cases, they're exempt now from a development charge, both at the county level and the local municipal level now, and that's across the province. And this just goes to the province really trying to encourage municipalities to support secondary units. And were changes to the Planning Act, also recommending that we look at providing these as of right so that they don't require a zoning amendment. But as I mentioned, we just want to make sure that even if we're permitting them as of right, we're able to ensure that they are going to be serviced properly, as well as making sure there's adequate parking. So we don't want to create parking issues on our roadways. But for sure, we think that secondary units are definitely a good, viable option in our communities. It helps someone to say enter into the market. If they have a secondary unit or basement apartment, they can help offset their mortgage costs and make it more affordable or attainable for them to actually purchase a house. So we think it's a great solution. It just needs to be looked at in proper detail when we're permitting these secondary units in each unit. But definitely a number of incentives that we're looking at, as well as on a policy basis trying to support these.
Thanks, Randy. Any other? Shirley, please.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. And I know this is near and dear to Warden McQueen's heart, but the topic of tiny homes and wondering, Randy, if you could touch on that and the potential for Grey County to be one of the first host counties for a tiny home community.
Yeah, thanks for that. And tiny homes, you know, the way we're trying to treat it is just smaller units will then be more affordable. And so if that's what we're calling the tiny home, then I think that's definitely something that we should be looking to try to promote and support. And this is where we've recommended that and most municipalities have already done this, where their zoning bylaws, for whatever reason, historically they set a minimum square footage for a housing unit. And historically that's been 1,000 square feet, 1,200 square feet. It varies by municipality. We're recommending just to remove that and to let the building code then dictate how small can we go. What is appropriate then based on building code safety of how small we can get a unit to make it livable and safe. And with our climate, it's a little bit more challenging. I think some of the things that we're talking about in terms of tiny homes and what we're seeing maybe in some of the states and some of the popular shows could work, but we will need to make sure that it works for our climate, for our area, because as we know, we get a little bit of snow in the wintertime. So we need to make sure that it's a viable option, sustainable option in our communities. But we think that one of the easiest solutions is to just remove those minimum square footages in zoning bylaws. And like I said, most municipalities in the county have already done that, which is fantastic. And then just let the building code dictate how small we can go. And to me, that's where we can definitely make some headway on the affordability side or the attainable side, because then if we can build 600 square foot units, for example, well, that's a lot more affordable than our minimum 1,000 or 1,200 square feet units that we've had historically. So that's something that we definitely want to continue to explore and work on a policy basis in terms of how we can support the smaller homes, tiny units, so we'll call them, and see how we can how that can help address affordability.
Thanks, Randy. Shirley, any other questions or comments on this section before we move forward?
Brian, if
Ashley, please.
Yes, I'm hearing a lot of talk about building affordable housing and trying to tiny homes, apartments, all of these things. Where does, as far as affordability, where does insurance fit into all of these things? Especially like a tiny house, how does it become insured? I know from the Chapman's perspective, our insurance rates have gone up almost double. There are several businesses in this area, especially snow removal businesses, who are going out of business because they can't afford the insurance. I've heard this from several other people. So the insurance part of it, how does that work into the long-term viability of some of these affordable residences?
That's a great question. We are hearing the same. Insurance premiums and rates are going up across the board, and it's making it it's creating more challenges for folks just to be able to afford insurance. Some are choosing not to have that insurance, which is a big, huge risk then. And so I think this is something that needs to be addressed on a larger scale for sure, but it definitely, I agree, Ashley, it impacts a viability or the sustainability of an affordable housing build if our insurance rates continue to increase, whether it be on an affordable housing complex or buildings, or if it's something else in terms of maintaining our parking areas or whatever it might be. The insurance seems to be, from what we're hearing, going up across the board. It's something that I know that we've discussed recently with council at our strategic planning session, as well as some other committee tables. I think it's something that we need to address, whether it be at the provincial or federal levels, to try to figure out how we address this. I don't know if Kim, if you have any further thoughts or comments on this, but
it was something that came up in our strategic planning session with council last week.
Kim, if you could just raise your volume just a little bit, please.
Sorry.
I think some committee members. Sorry.
Is that better if I'm that much closer?
Can you hear me now? Yeah. This is something that was raised in our strategic planning session with council last week. We are seeing that issues with either gaining insurance at all, or the rising cost of premiums impacting all sorts of aspects of our operations, of service providers to the county, and as you're rightly suggesting, Ashley, to the public. I think we are all a little bit caught in a hard place between the province and the insurance industry. I think advocacy on behalf of all of our interests back to the province about just truly making them aware of the significant impact this is having, and asking them to look into this and come up with some meaningful solutions. As Randy said, once people either stop providing the service because they can't get insurance or because they can't afford the insurance anymore, that's going to have a real drag on our local economy. And it's something that needs to be addressed. But I think the only thing that we can do now is to work closely with the insurance company. The county's insurer is Marsh, which is really a huge company, to work with them to understand the things that we can do that will most likely, in their eyes, mitigate risk, ensure that before we start something that they will in fact write a policy on it, and just kind of work with the industry. One thing we have found is that most of the larger companies have a fairly significant group of people that will work with a client to help them to make their service or their operations more insurable, more viable from the industry's perspective. And right now, that feels to me like the only tool that we really have is to work with them so that they understand what they're doing and they're comfortable with the level of risk that they're taking on.
Thanks, Kim. Any other questions, comments, or related aspects to this topic? As has been demonstrated by the conversation, there's a wide cross-section of issues as it relates to a single topic, and it's certainly multi-dimensional for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, thanks for the conversation and the update and the work that's definitely being done there. So we'll move on to Living on Main Street project. I keep thinking I'm teeing it up for somebody that I don't know who it is.
Scott Taylor this time, Brian.
Who is? Okay, Scott.
Good morning, everyone. And actually having the affordable attainable housing piece on the agenda right before the Living on Main Street item is a great tie-in. So this is a project that came about through a connection that Jacinda had with the University of Toronto. And we've got a team of 5 University of Toronto master's planning students working for the county in this regard at a no-cost basis, which is fantastic. On a project to look at our downtown policy areas and incentives. And it's something that Steve Furness in Economic Development and I have been kind of heading on behalf of staff, but it's really the students doing all the heavy lifting. So what they're looking at is 9 of our downtowns across the county, 1 in each of our member municipalities, and particularly the main streets. And what the state of the current Main Street is like in terms of both the commercial vacancy and also any residential vacancy, if there is any, and what we need to be looking at in terms of policy options here. We know that even prior to the pandemic, our downtowns were evolving. There's definitely a huge increase in online shopping, and there's other factors that have been influencing downtown commercial areas. We also know, as generated by the last discussion, there's a huge need for housing, and particularly rental housing. So we wanted to have the students explore whether there's any further opportunity in our downtowns to look at increasing the supply of housing, and particularly rental housing and affordable or attainable housing in that regard. A lot of planning policy around downtowns has remained relatively stagnant, if you will, over the last 50 years, in that we generally try to encourage ground floor commercial uses, things like stores or restaurants or even banks or things of that nature. and then ideally have residential above. But we know in many of our downtowns across the county, we have in some cases empty storefronts, and in some cases we even have vacant development properties there. So if we're looking ahead, 5, 10, 20 years, what is the appropriate policy mix for these downtowns? Do we need that level of commercial space? Should we look at some more flexibility on the ground floor? And particularly as our population continues to age, maybe some of those ground floors would provide excellent accessible housing opportunities, or maybe they would provide opportunities for a live-work scenario that could help a new business get started. So the students are really looking at what's going on within the county currently. They're also looking at what other municipalities are doing across the province. Maybe there's somebody that already has some really great innovative policy in that regard that we can borrow heavily from. And then they're also looking at our incentive programs. So primarily our community improvement plans across the county. Do these plans accurately reflect the needs of our business community in that regard? And are there barriers? And as Ashley pointed out, insurance might be one of those barriers that are preventing people from either renting out their commercial space or ideally also renting out the residential space. It could be that there's factors that the county or our member municipalities are in control of. Or it could be that there's other factors that we have less control over. Is something like the Residential Tenancies Act a barrier to someone wanting to take on new residential tenants? Or are there simply other charges like development charges that are getting in the way in that regard? So Steve and I have had the opportunity to have some good discussions with the students. Last Thursday, we had some of them come up to the county and we walked through 6 of the 9 member municipal downtowns. It was a nice rainy day, but gave them great exposure to Grey County. And I'll say they were really taken by the idea that there's some communities across Grey where we have, more jobs than the number of people or available housing to fill them. And I think that really captured their imagination and helped illustrate to them how pressing a problem this is throughout the entire county. So we are looking forward to their report, which will be coming in late November, early December. And certainly once it's available, we'll share it with this group. And it could result in the need for tweaks to our planning policies at either the official plan or zoning level. And it could also result in the need for further adjustments to our community improvement plans. So that's all I have on this topic. Certainly happy to take any questions, but Steve, I didn't know if you had anything further in this regard as well.
Oh yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Steve, do you want to? Do you have anything further, Steve?
Sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, no, you covered it well, Scott. They liked walking around in the rain.
Thanks. Any questions or comments for Scott on this topic at the moment?
Just one question. I like the concept, the Main Street concept. I like the idea of people living in the downtowns of all of our communities. That being said, I worry about the state of the buildings. Like whether it's downtown in Markdale or Durham or even Owen Sound. What is the county going to do to help bring some of these buildings to a safe level? Like forget about asbestos, like there's horsehair, insulation, there's chemicals that haven't been widely used since the 20s in some of our buildings. So someone who owns a building, say in Markdale, in the downtown of Markdale, who gets an environmental study and realizes that they've got a building worth $500,000 and they're going to need to at least put $300,000 in it to make it livable. How is this plan going to address that?
It's a great question. Maybe I'll take a shot at this one. And Steve, if you have anything further to add, feel free to jump in. So one of the things that we are having, and maybe I neglected to mention it in my presentation, one of the things we are having the students doing is interviewing a number of downtown building owners and landlords in that regard to, again, figure out what those challenges are. And I think the condition of some of the buildings will definitely be a challenge, as well as the age of some of the buildings, in that, you know, they were constructed under a long ago building code. And certainly we're trying to dig into whether that's a barrier to downtown business and landlords. Things like accessibility. Just because we have apartments above a shop doesn't mean they're actually safe to live in or available to members of our community that need them. We don't have a silver bullet for addressing sort of your question, Ashley, in terms of what can the county do in that regard to assist in some of those either unsafe or run down conditions. That's where we're hoping that through some of our community improvement plan incentives and working with our member municipalities, there may be incentive there to fix up some of those buildings, or in some cases even redevelop some of these properties. And hopefully through that renovation and redevelopment, we could see more attainable housing. The other thing we're trying to do is determine what level of incentive is needed. You know, it could be that if we're offering X amount, it just doesn't even touch the capital costs they would need to bring that building up to a safe standard. So we're not certain that this is going to be the solution, but hopefully it can inform us on at least part of the solution and inform us on either future policy or incentives that we need to look into to really make a dent in that housing supply and that safe housing supply, as you've pointed out.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Shirley, I think next, please. Oh, sorry, Kim. Yes.
Yeah.
Did you have something on that before we move forward?
Okay.
Sorry.
Just quickly, in the community improvement plan, part of what was on offer there was some grants or assistance to undertake the studies that you mentioned, Ashley. The other tool is something called tax increment financing, where you look at the value of a property today and the future value of that property, and you essentially provide the property owner with some cash flow really assistance, because you're going to phase in any future tax increases over a long period of time, so that they have an opportunity to as I say, try and cash flow that investment for them. So you do the work, and hopefully that then the change that you would have seen in the assessment and what that might do to your property taxes is phased in over a number of years, normally something like 10.
Thanks, Kim. Yeah. Shirley, you had a question, I think.
I did. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. In Meaford, we have a number of derelict buildings as well, so I appreciate your question, Ashley. And we brought in this year as a council a beefed up property standards bylaw that is complaint based. So in our situation, residents need to provide written complaint to the municipality so the bylaw officers can go in and encourage, and if necessary, force developers to improve their buildings. And if they choose not to, then those costs go on to their tax rolls. So that's kind of how we are working with getting some of our buildings upgraded. My question for you, Scott, and this may be outside the scope of this particular study, but thinking of the mention of the movement towards online shopping now, particularly these last few months through the pandemic, and I think the likelihood that that will continue. Is there any potential of the students looking at our downtowns and helping us as municipalities understand what types of businesses may now be successful on a main street in a small community, and to help our local economic development committees have a better understanding of what types of retail or businesses to go after?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's not something that we've explicitly tasked the students with at this stage, save and except for we have asked them to explore other municipal policies in this regard with respect to downtowns. One of the things we were chatting with the students on Friday, and one of the things that some municipalities have chosen to do is to adopt a strategy for their downtowns whereby you look at different percentages of uses. So 30% retail, 30% sort of restaurant and service, 30% more public uses like theaters and stuff like that. But we haven't explicitly tasked them with that question of what businesses will be successful in the current and the new economy. Certainly, if it's something that we want to look into further, or this group would like to see us look into further, maybe it's something that planning and economic development staff can start to put our heads around and possibly build into a future work plan, working, of course, with municipal staff who are in many cases the experts on the ground in that regard. But it's a little beyond the scope of the current project, but it sounds like a great thing to look into for sure.
Thanks, Scott and Shirley. Yes, Ian, Mayor Boddy.
Great, thanks, Brian. Three quick points. Shirley, the city Bowen Sound did that a couple of years ago with DIA. We got rural economic development funding, worked with Cheryl Bryan and did sort of a study of what was needed on Main Street or what holes maybe were there. A couple of years ago, we had our fires, the arson fires in August of 2015, I think. The fire department told me at that time that most of the buildings and apartments downtown were in better shape than the houses because they had to be retrofitted to be fireproof, et cetera, and all those apartments above buildings. They're actually not in as bad a shape as we think they are. And third point is retail has changed, shopping has changed, even going back to the Grey County Mall back in, when I was in my diapers, I think. Shopping has changed, and we've got way too much retail space on Main Street. I had a good talk with Gary Goya that owns the Heritage Grove and on Sound where Winners is. He's talking about Unionville and some of those places that you can get a really neat boutique downtown in a couple of blocks and put in more housing around it. And I think, that makes so much sense when we're probably going to have more vacant retail going forward and more need for housing, and why aren't we crossing that bridge a little faster? So as they do move into apartments, they will have to retrofit, but everything is pretty fireproofed above stores right now with the fire regulations. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Any other comments or questions, discussion items on this topic?
Mr. Chair, if I may ask a question.
Yes, please. Yes.
Thank you. Sorry, this is Akash Desai. Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Scott regarding this report. One of the issues that we have in our downtown, or not, I guess not issues, but in a vacant downtown, there's basically a vacant building tax incentive. My question through you, Mr. Chair, is whether or not this group of students will be studying the effects of removing that tax incentive, basically, and whether or not that's feasible in our downtowns, and if it'll make a positive result. Thank you.
Steve, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a question. So just to put it in context for the students, we did give them names of landlords, but you can appreciate that even if we give them 3 names of each landlords for each municipality, people they have to call. So it's to get a flavor, and that is one of the questions we've asked them to talk about. I do think that's an issue that we do have to look at and peel back. I know a number of communities have looked at it. I know in Toronto they repealed it, but they repealed that in Toronto because when they looked at it, the big banks were the only ones taking advantage of it. And so that was the real reason, in my understanding, is why they repealed it in Toronto, and they came up with different policies. I don't know that part of the argument I hear is that business owners keep their storefront empty so that they get the tax advantage. That economics of that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But we are going to ask the students to ponder that with some of the landlords, and not all the landlords may be in that situation. But part of what we wanted to get at was that what's the investment decision making? We can come up with zoning and policy, but what else is around it? I mean, one of the comments we got from one developer who's a renter in Gray said his salt costs have gone up, and I think, Randy, you know more of this better. The salt costs have gone up incrementally in the last little while. And these are factors that have nothing to do with government policy that affect investment decisions. So I think we want to have the students look at all that and give us evidence, and maybe we'll point in another direction, and maybe we have to dive into that particular subject in a bit more deeper context when we get the feedback.
Thanks, Steve and Akash. Any other questions or comments before we move forward? Seeing none, I just want to commend the people that organized to attract students at a very economic rate to develop the next generation of professionals and also to engage the creativity of the next generation. I think would be remiss if we didn't compliment whoever organized that. So congratulations, and that's another big feature of your undertaking. So thank you. On the next topic, impact of Grey County businesses. Who would like to move on to that?
That would be me.
Savannah, thank you, please.
Thank you very much. We've got 3 reports on here to share with you. We wanted to make sure that you had that information because we know that we haven't talked since February with this group, and everything we talked about on March 16th went that way because it no longer made any sense. So our work plans were thrown out the window, and we started from scratch on March 17th with our economic development working group. So these are long reports. We're not going to go through them all, but we wanted to make sure that you had the information. And I just want to highlight a couple of the pieces. I'm going to talk about the first 2 reports, and then we're going to get Steve to talk about the third because he's really been the lead on that. But what I really want to recognize is that when the pandemic hit, we already had an economic development working group that was made up of representatives from every one of our municipalities, our provincial representatives, our educational representatives, community representatives, labor market planning. We had them all together. We had a good team that had built trust and were able to very quickly change course and work together to make sure that we were going to listen to businesses and take action as fast as possible. And that's something that I think is really, really important because not every community had that. So we had an excellent group to be able to pull together. And on March 17th, we pulled that group together and we started meeting bi-weekly to talk about what it was that we were hearing from our business community, what it was that we were hearing from our politicians, and what we were seeing as staff that we needed to be able to do right away for our businesses. So that is where these reports have stemmed from. Everything that we have done over the last 7 months has been through that economic development working group. So I just want to make sure that we draw attention to them because this has been an absolute team effort. We've grown that group to 35. So we are a large bunch, but that means that we have a lot more eyes and ears and hands available to work and to make quick adjustments. So that has been an absolute positive for us. Through all of this work as well, we've stayed very connected to our Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, which then ties us into all of our other regional municipalities around Southwestern Ontario and beyond, as well as having regular contact with our federal agencies. So that has been important too. On our working group, we do have our provincial representatives from many of the ministries that we work with, but we don't have federal. So we've made sure to have that connection as well. By working with Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, we did 3 surveys. The third one just closed, so we'll have that information for you shortly. But the first 2 really painted a picture of what was happening in the business community and where the desperate need was and where they needed us to just back off and stay away. So those learnings were just as important. Why the pandemic impacts us so differently here in Grey County is because we are a region of small and medium-sized businesses. So when we look at our stats, we have about 10,500 businesses in Grey County, but 70% of those are either sole proprietors or home-based businesses. So they were hit particularly hard, and it's a very different circumstance when you have that really, really small to medium-sized business. What we saw as well at the very beginning were that the programs coming out from both federal and provincial governments were not focused on that type of business. So it was very difficult to find the supports that they needed to keep going. And what absolutely warms our heart, and was absolutely no surprise either, was that all of our businesses were most concerned about their people, about their employees, about their volunteers, any of the workforce that they had available. That was the number one concern. It wasn't about them themselves. It was about making sure that their people were going to be okay. And that is a very Grey County thing, and something that we needed to make sure we understood and got behind. So I'm not going to go through all of the results because you can see what they look like, but they were not good. There was absolute need for government support. Much of it came from federal and provincial, because at the local level, there are areas that it doesn't make sense for us to play. What did make sense was for us to work on tax relief and deferrals and financial supports in terms of grants. What we learned through the business surveys was that our businesses were saying, do not give us another loan. We do not need another loan to pay back. We need a grant. We need promotional support. We need an ear, but do not strap us with another loan. So we did not, we didn't go down that route where some of our other regions were going. Instead, we looked to do grants, and Courtney is going to talk a little bit about this morning about the starter company refresh that we were permitted to do by the province, and what she's seeing in terms of entrepreneurship, excitement and growth, because we're also never seen so much anticipation around starting own businesses or being your own employer. So there's a real shift happening. So to go through a little bit more, one of the other actions that I am most proud of our team, to just show you how quickly things can turn and how quickly we can take action. At the very beginning, when our businesses were saying, how do we let people know that we are open? How do we let them know we have gone online? We turned our business model over overnight, and we are doing everything completely new. How do we let people know we're still here and we haven't gone away while we were starting the lockdown? Whether it was curbside pickup or an online store that was temporarily set up. So through Philly and Steve and Joel and GIS, within 24 hours, we had a community and business resiliency map launched. So that was really impressive to be able to pull those resources together, drop everything, and make sure that we could get that up and running. And that map to this day is still growing. It shows what those changes were, who was open, whether they were allowed to be open because they were deemed essential, or who made those shifts to be open. So that has been an absolutely wonderful resource. And there was so much interest in it that Joel actually made it a free open source software that was adapted right across Ontario and right out to the, I believe, out east as well, Philly. We saw a community pick up out east. So our community and business resiliency map ended up all over the place, helping other municipalities. And we're glad that that was something we were able to do. So that has been an absolute key from the very beginning. Looking at some of those other recovery tools, and we won't spend much time on it because we've already talked a lot this morning about the CIP program, but that was the one piece on the work plan that didn't go anywhere. It was bumped up even more so in priority, because we understood that if we can get these incentives and we can get our municipalities to have this locally, then we have those dollars available to help spur investment, because we know regardless, the investment demand is not going to go anywhere. It's actually going to grow. And we have seen that through and through what we're seeing in housing, what we're seeing in retail space. And again, Courtney can talk about this. We're seeing a lot of people who want to go into downtowns, not to the level that we're going to need to sustain them, which is why looking at the residential side is also so important. But there is a renewed interest in downtown because of that small feel and the outdoor space and the ability to separate. So just really quickly looking at the second report and the follow-up survey, and what we know with surveys and we know with fatigue, whether it's webinar fatigue or Zoom fatigue, or survey fatigue. It is a real thing and it is happening. So our second survey was a full 100 results less, and a third survey we just ran was another 150 results left. So our numbers are dwindling, but because we've had so much contact directly with businesses and because we rearranged our team to make sure that we had more ears and eyes on the ground and all of our working group helping to bring that information back, we still feel confident in the results that we're getting from those surveys because we're able to compare them to what we're hearing from our business community. So the other big piece that we did kind of partway through pandemic when we realized how our work plans were changing and how our plans, now we always have a plan A, B, C, and D, because you never know which one you're going to need depending on the day, because things do change so quickly. We adjusted our staffing levels and we adjusted where people's focus were and created new teams. So instead of having dedicated economic development, dedicated tourism, and one communications, we actually beefed up communications by combining Grey Roots and economic development and tourism staff together. Consultations and training, our Business Enterprise Center took the lead on all of that, so no other departments would be doing that same work. And then economic recovery, Steve led that with tourism as well. So we've pulled everyone together, we rearranged the staffing, and we are still in that same boat because it is working really well. So we'll have another report for you later on this year that we can talk more in depth about where we want to go with that. But at this point, we are still doing that same staffing complement because it makes a lot of sense. We divided by expertise instead of department, and that is how we've been able to move so quickly in a lot of this work. One of the other components, like I mentioned, part of why we want the CIP to be running and up and going is so that as investment ready projects and as funding comes down the pipeline, because we are seeing that happening, that our municipalities are ready, that our businesses are ready, and that they're able to take advantage of those programs. One of the difficult things is that as programs are announced, it could be many, many months before there's an actual application or anything ready, even though they have limited timelines. So it's making sure that we're aware of what's available and what's coming and that we're ready for when it does. So making sure we have the plans in place and the people in place and the partnerships. So that's a lot of the work that's happening behind the scenes. One glimmer of hope that we are seeing is that in some cases, we've had businesses who are reporting their best year ever because it really has been a great divide. So on one side, we're seeing we have lost business. We are seeing in the middle businesses that are barely holding on or they're doing okay. And on the other side, they're having their best years because things have changed so quickly. So what we have tried to do through our Business Enterprise Center and through all the consultations that staff have had with business is to encourage them to not forget everything they learned in the spring, making those changes online, changing their business models, making sure that it is something that they can sustain through the long term, because we just never know if we're going back to step 2, if we're going back to a lockdown, or if we're going to be in this boat for the next couple of years. We don't know. And it's really difficult to plan. And as a business owner who is a small business owner and already, you know, they are the accountant, they are the HR department, they are the marketing department, and they are the staff. It's a tough time to try and make plans. So that is what we have done as staff to make sure that we are there and that we are listening and that we are doing everything possible with our working group to make their life a little bit easier, to make their environment a little bit better, and making sure that we put all the information in one spot so they don't have to go chasing through the information overload that has become the pandemic. So that is how we got to the recovery plan and the recovery phase that we reallocated our own budgets to when we realized that, again, because all our work plans went out the window, that meant our budget did too. So we wanted to go back to council in June and ask for permission to rethink our entire year. So Steve's going to talk a little bit about that and recovery, and then we'll get Courtney to talk about entrepreneurship.
Thanks, Savannah.
Okay, thanks, Savannah. So it seems like quite a while ago that we get March, but our phase 1 recovery plan, and we're now into phase 2, but a phase 1 recovery plan was a huge pivot as Savannah talked about. But one of the things the the principles or the outcomes that we were looking for is that businesses felt confident in reopening their businesses for their employees and customers. We were hearing a lot about that, and that they had the resources to move to e-commerce, and that they understood government programs, not just for themselves, their business and their employees, because the programs actually fit into 3 different areas, and that they were trying to encourage them to be optimistic. And at that time, and even now, is challenging. So with that, I'll just highlight some of the areas. The first thing that we focused on, and was the immediate need, was getting the facts out. What are the facts? So what are the government support programs? Because they started when they shut the economy down, and that's basically what happened. Their government programs started coming out very quickly. So we had to get the facts of what that was about. Again, secondly, was to promote what Grey County businesses were open, and the resiliency map grew and grew and grew. And we also had what are the critical business information, the protocols, the procedures. We came up with a guideline for that. How do you deal with staff? And we even had a toolkit where we had a Grey County poster saying when their hours of operation were, decals, and a postcard, and those were hand delivered to businesses in Grey that had requested that. And finally, we have a 1-800 line, which we still have and maintain. So if anyone has any questions, we can try and help. And it was trying times. I mean, I remember when the restaurants opened up 24 hours before they were allowed to be opened up, we still didn't have the protocols. So it was very challenging. And then on the community confidence side, there's another area we talking about generally to the public about the safety protocols as it relates to businesses. You know, do you need to wear a mask? Early on, that wasn't necessarily a requirement, but later on, what did become. In terms of open space and green spaces, we talked about what trails are going to open, what signage are we going to put, and in some places, they became hotspots and became problems, so we had to put actual staff out there and ambassadors. We also produced a video with public health talking about how and promoting businesses that were successful in using a PPE. The purpose there was to give confidence to consumers that they could go out and shop, and that businesses had the right protocols in place. And then we had a downtown toolkit, which really was a government, Grey County's giving each municipality about $2,200 to be used however they wanted in terms of making their downtown safer and more open and welcoming. And so that was done very quickly. And I believe most municipalities have taken advantage of that. And then finally, we had a class celebration around our youth retention, celebrating their graduation in a way that allowed them to do that. And then in terms of small business support, again, there's a program called Shop Here, Digital Main Street, trying to encourage businesses and helping them support to go online because that's where everything was moving to. And Courtney will talk later about the small business support program that they delivered for moving online with businesses. So there's $2,500 there. And then our business toolkit, again, I talked about that. So we also had a big buy local campaign where we talked about each municipality promoting their businesses, had a radio campaign and a contest. And I think that went over very well. And we're looking at doing something similar to that again. And in particular, we really wanted to focus on the patios. You know, this impact is impacting businesses differently across the economy, and in particular restaurants and the tourism sector. So that's one of the areas we focused on. And I thought that went over very well. And we had great participation from our working group and each municipality. And we're going to be looking to do something similar in the fall. And then again, on tourism, again, marketing campaigns and videos showing what businesses were open, but also one that thanking the community for their support. We've heard a number of times from business owners that they really knew that the community was supporting them and going out of their way to actually purchase local and make sure that they were supported. So we're gearing up again for our fall winter campaign, and it may actually be a very challenging time for certain businesses. But that was what we did in terms of phase one recovery. And we're going to continue many of those of those aspects. So that's not all the details, but that's a quick highlight.
Thanks, Steve. Before we go on to Courtney, I think we maybe should pause. Any comments so far, or questions so far? I think it's evident that, Shirley, I'll come to you in just a second. It's evident the clear pivot and getting folk refocused and contributing is certainly evident in the report. So that's Shirley, please.
And thanks, Mr. Chair. And just quickly, I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Savannah and her group for all of the great efforts that they have undertaken. And through our own local recovery task force, we have often referred to the work of the county and the materials that you have been able to provide. So Savannah, I just want you to know what a great support you've been for us locally. Thank you.
Oh, I
Any other comments before we go to, go to Courtney? Is it? Oh, sorry, Lisa. Thank you.
Could I just also make an observation that I've had the privilege to participate in the Economic Development and Tourism Working Group, and my observation would be that having had the opportunity to live in a few different areas and regions and be involved with community economic development, I have been so impressed by the level of cooperation and collaboration between the various municipalities in the county, because in my experience, that doesn't always happen everywhere. And people really came together and pulled together from the different municipalities and worked together. And it was very refreshing and heartwarming to see. And I think it's been very successful. And I think all of the municipal employees and elected representatives deserve to give themselves a huge pat on the back for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And traveling from a what is now a different zone, COVID zone, and arriving in Owen Sound, before this event, that's a recent experience that Lisa's reflecting on. So thank you. Any other comments before we move? I think it's move forward to Courtney. Have I got that right, Savannah?
Yes, please. I think she's got some really good information to share.
Courtney. Okay, let's Courtney, would you please?
Absolutely, and I apologize for having my video off. My internet can't support it. But so I'll give you a little.
And I think we just we're having a hard time hearing you. Just thanks, Courtney, if you would.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, you got to turn your volume up, I think.
Unfortunately, it's up all the way. I think it is probably my internet. Give me 2 seconds. I'm just going to move to another part of the house. This is what happens when you live in an old farmhouse. 1 sec.
I was going to bring up the SWIFT project in the roundtable, so we can. This might demonstrate it.
Yeah, and that is definitely coming in the next report for you.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Much better. Thank you, Courtney.
No problem. I apologize. Yeah, let's talk about rural internet. That's a big one. So a little bit of a summary of where our office has been the past probably 6 months is historically we have always launched a grant program to support new businesses each year. And when it was time to do that, we were looking kind of at the community and where things were, and we really couldn't justify offering a program to support new businesses when our existing businesses were suffering. So we approached the province about our funding and asked if we could shift the model of our program and instead focus on recovery and assisting those businesses who were already in existence. Luckily, they supported that. And then Grey County, through reevaluating their budget, was able to match our funding, which allowed us to put out $100,000 in grants into the community to help those businesses. There was 45 businesses that were supported, and they weren't large grants. They were $2,500, but Savannah, when she was touching on, the scale of the businesses within our county, I think this program was a good reminder of how that funding still has the ability to make a big change. Because for many of the businesses, the feedback we received, we've now wrapped up the program, but the feedback we received was that's what they needed to keep going. That's the funding they needed to keep their head above water. And so it was really interesting to receive that. And about a third of the businesses used the funding for PPE and for physical modifications just to allow them to continue to deliver their services. Probably the other 2/3 that received the funding use it to pivot their model or to access additional revenue streams, many choosing to go online. And that didn't mean that they weren't offering still a bricks and mortar option, but it was just allowing them to reach clients in a larger way, which is just as far as from a business model perspective, obviously makes a whole lot of sense. So they were just strengthening their business model through receiving these grants, which is really great to see, because that'll obviously continue on into the future. And again, Savannah also mentioned, we're looking at business models in a different way. And part of what we're doing now is when we meet with people looking to start new businesses is we're saying, are you pandemic proof? Let's look at your model. Now we have this new vision to look at businesses under, and how will you survive should we ever end up in this situation again, which has been helpful. So the program was really well received. In addition to receiving the grant, something that we also did was we offered them 2 hours of advisor or mentorship in an area of specialty of their choosing. So about 30% of the businesses took us up on that. And we let them choose the area in which they felt they needed assistance in. And then we kind of curated and handpicked someone to work with them. The thing I liked about that was A, it was very specific to their needs, but B, we were also, because the advisors and mentors were compensated, we were also supporting those businesses during this time. So there was 2 businesses being supported in the process. And although, we got wonderful feedback on the grants, and, grants are always appreciated, I think the most feedback we received was on the advisorship and how that really was so incredibly important to them at that moment in time, and how beneficial they felt that was for their business and its success. So based on that, we're kind of looking forward and how we deliver our training through the Business Enterprise Center and how we do education, and probably shifting that model to more of a one-on-one with advisors and mentors. And this has been a conversation we've been having for a while within the county, but this was an interesting way to pilot it and really get a lot of feedback from businesses on how beneficial it could be. So we're kind of at the point now where we're taking a step back and we're really looking at how we're going to deliver that in the future. That was our recovery program. And then in addition to that, we also are always offering just general consultations. And what we saw, which may be just interesting for people to hear, is obviously things got quite quiet at the beginning of the pandemic, but then July, specifically August and into September, we really saw an increase in the amount of people coming through our center looking for assistance, and higher than over the last couple of years for sure. So in August, for example, I think we had 70 just general inquiries about starting a business. And then I sat down and did, or like virtually did one-on-ones with 20 people who were kind of already in process of starting a business. And the feedback we were receiving was, this has been a great opportunity for me to take a step back, reevaluate, figure out what I really want to do. And for these individuals, it was starting their own business. So it was interesting. When the pandemic first started, my initial thought was, well, this will be something that, scares people a little bit and maybe something that stops them from wanting to start their own business, but it's actually had the opposite effect. It has accelerated people and made them reevaluate. So I think we are going to continue to see a lot of new businesses coming into our communities as a result of all of this. And the thing that really surprised me was a lot of them are bricks and mortar, which I absolutely did not expect. I thought the majority we would see would be online, and that hasn't been the case. There's kind of been a resurgence in some of these downtowns and people wanting to open new businesses in these spaces, which is really refreshing to see. So that's just, what we're seeing through our center. And I know, everyone has feedback on what they're seeing through their roles, but it's been an interesting perspective for sure.
Thanks, Courtney. Any questions or comments for any of the presentations, Savannah, Steve, and Courtney at this point? Hearing none, that's thanks very much for the updates from all three, and certainly reiterate the sentiment of when in times of adversity, it's a lot of the support and providers. That's when you actually you build a trust and a bond, and the county has sure done that. So that's a congratulations to everybody involved in that. So I think we're at the point of a roundtable discussion, which is interesting on a Zoom environment. I'm not sure how we will accomplish this, but I would, we will take a stab at it. So who would like to, this is a time for people to give comments, perspectives, you know, other things that we haven't addressed that might be on any of the participants' minds.
I'd like to start. So Jacinda Rudolph here, Economic Development Officer, and I'm part of the recovery team. And I guess I just wanted to highlight a couple of points with regards to the surveys. So we did just close the third survey, and Savannah gave a great rundown of the first two surveys, and survey fatigue for sure. But I just wanted to highlight the fact that, you know, we had 111 respondents for this survey. And to me, part of my job is to review the surveys and go through the narrative. And in creating that survey, we had the option to add some of those, you know, other comments and kind of that space for people to express themselves. And it's an opportunity for us to have a conversation. It's almost like having a conversation with 111 different businesses. So, you know, as much as some of them are, you know, a little not as optimistic as others, it allows us to hear what some of their concerns are and what some of their needs are. And, you know, the top three concerns looking forward just for this survey for those 111 businesses were financial impact on operations and capital. The second one was decreasing consumer confidence and spending. And then the third one was global or Canadian recession. So when we're discussing our, you know, recovery plan and looking at our work moving forward, we get to look at these and I kind of compile that narrative piece and get a perspective from so that we know where we can, you know, spend our energy for the next few months to support these businesses. And I just wanted to highlight two trends, or maybe three trends. More support for, you know, we mentioned small and medium businesses and the support that they needed. And, you know, as the time went on, they got some support. But then there's also the businesses that don't qualify for any of the government supports. And the top three government supports were CEBA, the loan, the $40,000 loan, the wage subsidy, and also CERB for sole proprietors. And those ones were the top, but there's still the individuals the businesses that don't fall in that category and still don't get the support, and also new businesses. So anyone who unfortunately, you know, opened their new business, you know, in 2019 and don't qualify or are not eligible for any supports, those businesses still need our support. And also by supporting local businesses, you also get to attract and retain some of the individuals that are moving here. So there has been a trend of people moving from the urban area and coming to the, you know, to the rural area. And, you know, we should take this opportunity to highlight what our local businesses and services are, some of the ones that we take for granted, and also, you know, make sure we keep those individuals that have just moved here, because we need the labor force for our businesses. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Jacinda. Yes. Yeah. Shirley, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And Jacinda, as you're speaking, it reminded me of the importance of our Newcomer Program. And I wonder if you could speak to where that program is at and if it has been expanded or changed in any way in relation to the pandemic and welcoming new immigrants into the area. We're seeing them in Meaford, and I know we're seeing them across the county. And just wondered if you could speak to that.
I think I'll take this opportunity maybe to pass this on to Melissa Avedizian, because she's kind of taken over our newcomer support, and I'm just trying to help her. But Melissa, do you want to give her an update on GB Lip?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everybody, and good morning, Shirley. Thank you for the question. My name is Melissa Avedizian, and from what I recall from earlier this meeting, the last time you had met was prior to the funding approval received from IRCC. Okay, so following your last group meeting, Grey and Bruce counties, prior to that, had put in an application to Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada for a local immigration partnership. These partnerships really revolve around creating collaboration and connection and partnerships with our community services and our employers to support our newcomer communities. And so in April, just after the pandemic hit, Grey and Bruce counties received approval for funding. And so I was hired in July to really get the local immigration partnership rolling. So just a quick update with regards to the activities that we're currently undertaking. We have started to gather our partners from the different municipalities, our different community partners, our service providers to create a partnership council. This partnership council will allow the connection, the collaboration, and coordination of multiple partners involved in fostering welcoming communities and supporting our newcomer communities. And I should also mention at the same time that Grey and Bruce counties received funding for the indirect service, so providing supports to our employers and our community partners, the YMCA in Owen Sound, which provides services to both Grey and Bruce counties, received IRCC funding for the direct service of newcomers. So they provide the settlement and language, settlement services and language training services to our newcomer communities. So we both received funding together. And so it's really exciting that we're both here and starting to establish our roots in Grey and Bruce counties. We held our first partnership council meeting in September, and we had just over 30 partners attend. It was from municipalities throughout the regions, both Grey and Bruce counties, county representation, school boards, employers, post-secondary education, service providers, and community partners. So at that meeting, we had just over 30, and today we have close to a group of 50 that have decided that this is something that they really see value in and they want to be a part of. And so we're holding our next meeting with that larger group in November. In addition to that, we are also currently working with a consultant for the local immigration partnership to create a strong brand, including a logo, so that we can really identify the work that we do and the partners that are involved moving forward in that communications and marketing piece to really broaden our reach in terms of making sure that everybody knows that we're here and why we're here and the important work that we're doing. And in addition to that, we're working with a second consultant for a settlement strategy and action plan. And so that's working with a consultant to have a lot of facilitating conversations and engaging our partners and our employers in the challenges that they're experiencing, the opportunities that they see, things that are working well, the research that's already been done in the numerous projects that have already taken place in our regions, and bringing it all together to create an action plan which will guide us through the work of our funding. And the funding has been approved for IRCC for the next 3 to 5 years. So that's a really exciting opportunity that we will be here for the long term.
Thanks, Melissa. Any other questions or comments, discussions? Items? Seeing none. Upcoming events. I guess they're virtual, so.
We have none. None scheduled. Yes, none planned.
Okay. None scheduled. Fair enough. Any other business to address at this point in time? We're going to talk about our next meeting date, which will be less than 8 months from now. But any other business that's
I did have one other face that I wanted to introduce everybody to, if that's okay. So since we met last, we've
sure, by all means.
New staff. So Melissa doing our Grey Bruce Local Immigration Partnership, and also Kim Trombley, you just put her video on there so we can see her now. She is the assistant to our Economic Development, Tourism, and Culture Department. She is keeping all 3 departments running and together with us. So hopefully she'll become a very familiar face to everybody here, but wanted to make sure that we had the opportunity to introduce you to her this morning and her to you.
Welcome. That's great. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me.
We look forward to, yes, thanks. That's good. Any other business that we would like to address at this point? Seeing none, next meeting date, we have a proposed next meeting date of December the 15th at 8:30 in the morning. It is not weather dependent, it is only internet dependent, if that is a possibility. That if we could put that in a placeholder, and then Tara will send out meeting invitations and or placeholder for that. I'm not hearing any great objections, so we can proceed with that, and unless this has to be rescheduled at a later date, but that's the next proposed date. And as you can tell, there's several items that are percolating that will be refreshed and be important aspects for the committee to address and before a new year happens. So any other factors or anything else before we have a motion to adjourn? Just while that's developing, obviously this is the first time for this committee to meet via Zoom or on a virtual basis, and also a live stream basis. So you know, adversity has created opportunity, which actually gives more opportunity for people to see the workings of this committee. So some positives actually come out of a bit of adversity, and this is an example of that. So seeing no other topics to be addressed at this, could I have a motion to adjourn, please?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, Horton. And I think Tom is going to second that. And this meeting is now officially adjourned. Thanks everybody for all your participation and the work that's gone on over the last several months. I know it's been extraordinary. So